Many thanks for staying with us. Joining us now is Dr. Wisdom Enang to examine the challenges and opportunities arising from Trump's policies as we explore strategies for Nigeria to mitigate potential negative impacts and also leverage potential benefits. Many thanks for joining me on the program, Dr. Wisdom.
Thank you very much and good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. As you know, we've seen how, President Donald Trump has been, all about his America First policy. How do you think this policy would, affect us, particularly in terms of trade and investment? He prioritizes American interests and jobs. It has also led his policy, the American First policy, has led to tariffs and trade restrictions, not just affecting Nigeria, but global trade patterns. And, our economy is heavily reliant on international trade, and it's essential for us to consider how this policy might affect our economy. What do you make of, President Donald Trump's America First policy?
All right. I think the president's policy is going to, like you said, affect trade and investments. And for us to understand how much of an impact it's going to have, let's take our mind back to 2019, 2020, when President Trump was, the president at the time, and we had the COVID-19. And, the U.S. were actually producing a lot of oil. And what that meant was that Nigeria actually had issues with, finding buyers for its oil, because at that moment, we had the U.S. going from being a net buyer to a producer and also a seller. So that was one of the biggest problems. And you could read headlines where Nigerian crude shipments were actually looking for buyers. So I think we're going back to those era where we potentially will have our products, and then would have to look at new buyers across the globe, new arrangements. And also, if we're having products that we're actually taking to the US, we should expect some sort of increased tariffs. And why is that so? Because the US have said, look, any country that has joined BRICS, which is militating against the US plans and dominance, means that you obviously would have 100% tariff on whatever products that you have. And BRICS, as you know, Nigeria just joined more recently. So it's going to affect. Now, when it comes to investment, you have to look at some of the imperatives that are putting the investment to a place like China, where there's very good regulations to support manufacturing capabilities and allow you to grow any manufacturing company that you set up there. And as such, you find out that the US are trying to say, what are those things that are pulling our product manufacturing into China and other areas? What can we do differently to be able to get these products into the United States? And if that happens, then we'll begin to see a scenario where the same companies that were trying to invest in Nigeria are, rethinking their capabilities and rethinking the possibilities and investing in countries like the US. I'll give you one context. When a company that I worked for previously, ExxonMobil, were looking at their rebranding in terms of how they look at their investment portfolios, they decided to take a more global look at their investments and said, okay, look, instead of having multiple investments whereby we sanction investments based on the best proposition that each country can offer, we are going to look at a global pool of investments where the best investments in the world are going to be where we put our money. And three critical projects stood out. The first was the Permian Basin, where there's oil exploration going and production going on in the US. The second was in Papua New Guinea. The third was in Mozambique, and the fourth, in no particular order, was in there's this other country up where they produce a lot of oil. That was the fourth one, but in South America. Now, why is this important? Because when they looked at the entire physical scenario, yeah, Guyana is a country. When they looked at all the scenarios and all the investment propositions, they found out that those were the four places where they could make their money. And now the share of ExxonMobil has grown more than twice its value in 2020, for example. So why is this important? If the US should be able to tweak its investment value proposition, it therefore means that companies that are looking at global investment platforms, global investment decisions may prioritize the US over African countries. And that means that we will lose those investments that ought to be coming to Africa. Remember, the other rhetoric that was dominant was the idea of climate change, and that was what we were thinking about. Okay, climate change. So a lot of these projects that were sort of pro fossil energy were being shut down. But currently, with the reverse of what the US is doing, it's reversing a lot of that rhetoric, meaning that countries are going to go in there, explore whatever resources there are, without minding whether it's about the climate, it's good for the climate or not. So Africa on this other end is going to be on the receiving end of losing, because basically we won't have the funding, and that's one of the biggest things. The funders are putting out their funding and they're being compelled to look in the other direction, which is the US market.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wisdom. But let's look at trade relations, particularly as regards the African Continental Free Trade Area. And we know that it's all about, creating a single unified market for African countries, and then our participation in that could also boost our economy. But how about Trump's trade policies? Don't you think it might affect our ability, to benefit basically from that agreement?
I think we would benefit because the African Trade Zone Agreement has more to do with the African continent. It depends on what products, but it also depends on how we structure the currency of trade to not be dollar dependent. Because think about it, the whole Trump policies will catch countries that are dependent on the US for trade, as I said before, or for the currency use. That's where you don't want to be. But as far as Africa is concerned, I think that's even a better way to build resilience. Because think about it, Trump is not trying to get everyone to be dependent on the US and definitely be scared of the US decisions. It's just trying to say whatever we used to do, all the freebies that used to be on the table is no more from the US. Find a way to survive. So I think the African trade, zone definitely gives us some sort of, approach to actually de-dollarizing the economy, allows us to look at the regional market, see how we can exercise our dominance around the regional market, and certainly see how we can create new trade partners. Because ultimately, you need to understand something. Look at the Dangote refinery, for example. Now it's been able to establish dominance in such a way that in the West African corridor, people are coming to buy all the way from Europe. You get headlines like they are kind of creating panics across European refineries, and that's what they ought to be. We have to establish new trade partners, and the African Free Trade Zone Agreement is actually one of the things that we ought to be looking at to establish that.
Okay, thank you. How about foreign investment? Take, for instance, Trump's stance, including immigration, trade, and all that. How do you think that might affect foreign investment in Nigeria? How his policies, might affect foreign investment in key sectors like technology, agriculture, and even manufacturing?
All right. I mean, definitely foreign investments, is going to be reshaped, right? And the reshape, in my words, are going to be looking at not really foreign investment from a standpoint of charitable foreign investments to help the nation. It's about the value proposition. I mean, I look at some of the Trump videos, and he talks about the fact that he's ready to go and have discussions where you can see a clear line of sight to value for America. So you find out that it's not about, oh, US wants to do this for the sake of this. He's saying, look, I'm going to look at it as a businessman, and more so, I'm going to be looking at it more as how can I ensure that whatever you're doing is not parasitic to the US, but is creating symbiotic value. So there will be investments where we can create symbiotic value, definitely. But there will not be investments if we are looking at Big Brother just giving dozing out support for Nigeria. No, it won't happen. And that's the way we need to start rethinking the repurposing of our investment value proposition to American investors.
All right, thank you. We'll just take a quick break right now. When we come back from that break, we'll look at other issues like climate, and President Trump's stance on climate and how it can affect us. We'll be right back after this quick break. Please stay with us. Many thanks for staying with us. We still have Dr. Wisdom Enang, a policy analyst, with us, joining us via Zoom, discussing President Trump's policy trust. And we will be looking now at climate, President Trump's climate stance, his stance on climate. And we know that Nigeria has been committed to reducing carbon emissions and also promoting sustainable development. But President Trump's stance on climate change and environmental policies might affect global efforts, to address these issues, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Wisdom, can you help us examine the implications of these policies on our sustainable development efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about the issue of decarbonizing the climate or the environment, you talk about the need for sophisticated technology. You talk about the need for energy transition. You talk about the need for ownership of technology. You talk about the need for funding. So let's think about, for example, the issue of funding. A lot of the decarbonization initiatives were anchored on the fact that as you begin to decarbonize and open up into where we have the carbon credits and all of that, there are funding that you can access for your projects, which otherwise conventional energy projects will not be able to access, but you can access it, and that meant that there was a commercial incentive for companies and even countries to want to decarbonize. But with the change in rhetoric and with the US having run as one of the frontliners in providing funding for global, green energy initiatives or clean energy initiatives, that means that will slow down. The incentives are going to be removed, and a lot of countries may not bother. More so for African nations. And I'll put into context, Africa contributes less than 4% of the footprint in terms of carbon footprint to the entire world. And so you find that there are less reasons for Africa to get out of its way, get its budget, and fund those green energy projects, especially where there are no external support coming in, when it doesn't contribute that much to the environment. And this goes to sort of solidify the position of Africa when it comes to a just energy transition. The just energy transition is simply saying, based on the realities that we do not have, we are not the major contributors of pollution. Let us contribute and steward our transition, energy transition, but in a way that does not upset our economy, in a way that is sustainable for us from a financial standpoint, but in a way that allows us to leverage the energy source that we have, build on it to industrialize our economy, get clean energy before moving into cleaner forms of more cleaner forms of energy. So clean up the existing ones before moving up to alternative forms. So that's what's going to happen on that front. When it comes to the technology, you can understand that China and the US were great runners in this technology. What you're going to see is that China is going to switch and take over some of those companies that are running the decarbonization projects, for example. They're going to be moving towards owning most of those intellectual properties for those technologies, for example the battery technologies and all of that. Considering the fact that the US is sort of relaxing on them, so that's what we're going to expect. So for those that will be running, looking at partnerships for decarbonizing and looking at those alternative technologies, I think the new partners might be China. That's just my thought process. And then, of course, when we look at the whole scheme of things, like I said, funding, it's a big one because the question is, how are you going to encourage people to run those initiatives? So you're going to see that funding is only going to be made on a need basis. For example, the Nigerian government will be willing to fund transition projects that would help them solve specific problems. One, if the cost of petroleum, like we've established, is quite high, of liquid petroleum, and we're now looking at CNG, that's a reason to fund the transition to CNG. That's on one part. The other part is, if we're now looking at, okay, the transition to cleaner energy forms will allow us to open up other sectors. For example, if you go into the production of battery cells, you definitely need to get those resources mined, and that means we have the potential to open up our mining sector. We also have the potential to begin to produce and assemble those cars in country. That could be an incentive. So a lot of countries that will be funding this on themselves will funding it after creating that connection between those transition projects and the wider gain for the economy.
Thank you, Dr. Wisdom. But I'm going to ask you this last question. You can give me your answers in 1 minute. President Trump's first term in office, the first time as president, I'm sure that there are lessons we should have drawn from when he was president. And can you just tell us how those lessons can, inform some of our policy decisions moving forward?
Yes, those lessons call for us to look inwards. Those lessons definitely call for us to pull the strength of first as a nation pull together and operate as in one strength to build the economy. We also call for the African continent to look at the strategies to allow it survive. It also calls for us to establish other partnerships. I see India being a great partner to Nigeria. Going forward, I see China being a great partner, and there are other ways. And I also see us, potentially building, for example, in agriculture, the storage and the processing facilities are things that we can do to enhance our value chain, so that when we produce these crops, when we are able to process to standards, international standards, we are able to store, then we can potentially attempt to export some of those crops that we already have enough, sufficient for the country. So it also calls for us to look at managing our resources, knowing that there's no one that would come giving us, resources to, giving us money to run any financial deficit. So it calls on the overall for us to look inwards and intensify the approach of diversifying our economy.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wisdom, for sharing your perspective with us on the topic. We sincerely appreciate.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's the size of our package for you today on Business Points. Do make it a date with us tomorrow for another interesting episode of the program. From all of us at Global Television, we say have a beautiful day ahead. And don't forget to follow us across all social media platforms using our Global TV NG and other handles now showing on your screen. I'm Queen Agaba. Thank you for watching and see you again.